The guys that interested me were the dark ones. I thought the dark ones were interesting. And I thought in order for me to be happy, I needed to make substantial work.
Shia LaBeouf, one of Hollywood's finest, just shut down the Hollywood atheist elite, openly declaring, "Jesus is my savior." What happened?
Allora, Shia, tu sei nato a Los Angeles 35 anni fa e che ricordi hai dei primi anni della tua vita?
This is where he concluded his question.
Soprattutto come, leggeresti, definiresti la tua famiglia oggi?
For those who didn't get what went on, the interpreter came in handy.
So Shia, you were born 35 years ago. What can you tell us of your youth? What kind of a child were you, and how would you describe your family?
Shia's response revealed a lot about him, his drive, and the reasons for the choices he made so far.
I grew up, we were happy, lower income, lived in downtown LA, and I wanted to be rich.
But that was not all he had to say.
And the exports in Los Angeles were be a drug dealer or a gangster or a criminal or be an actor.
Even though he answered the question straight, there were still many questions awaiting him.
With your family, was your family a religious family? Which were the most important values?
It seemed like this particular question was aimed at revealing what Shia's family was like.
My mother was come from Hasidic Jews, but was like performative religious. Show up to shul on the big holidays.
Though he gave a great perspective of his background, he still had more to say.
Dad went to prison when I was young and came out Methodist Christian. He was a chaplain in prison. And so when he came out, I got baptized.
Shia obviously must have had a rough start. But the next question unraveled something even more shocking.
Which were the things that interested you more in life, and which was your dream?
What he said here was clearly his greatest drive in life.
My family broke up because of money. So I wanted money. So I wanted my family. And being an actor seemed like an easy way to make money so I could have my family.
While all he wanted was to make money for his family, his choice was reasonable.
So your career in cinema started quite early. How old were you when you first started?
What he went on to say was a whole lot of revelation.
I got my first job when I was 10 years old, 10. My dad sold cocaine to stand-up comedians at this place, a stand-up club called the Ice House.
But he was done, and this is what he said next.
And I would go and I met a man named Jay Leno, big stand-up comedian. He had a show, a big show in the States called The Tonight Show.
Shia explained how his passion to make money drove him closer to great opportunities.
And he brought me on to the show, and then I did skits, and I got an agent. My dad was in a biker gang called the Mongols.
But that was not all, he said, as he added more interesting details.
And the reason that's important is because we would go to the stand-up club with all his friends, and they would laugh at my jokes. And they were big men.
Based on what Shia said here, it seemed he had all the support needed from his family. Then he added,
10 big men laughing, and it makes everyone else laugh because they have to. So the pressure of that is what Jay Leno saw.
And this was where he gave it a good landing.
At 10 years old, doing stand-up for a room of my dad's friends, and everybody else who was there laughed because these men were laughing.
Obvious that meeting with Jay Leno was the turning point he desperately needed. And then the next question was timely.
You soon started having important roles. For instance, you interpreted Louis Stevens in the TV series Disney Channel, a role that enabled you to win.
This was not all she had to ask as she continued.
Then Indiana Jones, the trilogy of Transformers, Disturbia, and Wall Street. These are just a few among the important films you took part in.
Shia's response was totally unexpected, as what he said drove shock down the spine.
These are the international movies that may have come here, but these movies don't mean anything. They have no intrinsic value. They have no spirit. They don't mean anything.
If you thought that was all, you are in for a bigger surprise, as the next question took things deeper.
what happens in your life? You start living some experiences that shed darkness in your life. Would you like to talk about this?
This is where Shia totally broke the camel's back, revealing insane details about his life.
All these movies, I have big shame about these movies. They don't mean anything. And I felt like I was living a life that was meaningless. And so I drank a lot and smoked a lot of weed.
He was not done and looked like he had a lot on his chest.
Very lascivious with women and was trying to like fill a hole, just constantly chasing instincts, just like an animal.
What he said next made it clear that his life was not headed in the right direction.
And thought I was in control of things. And I was in an industry that would applaud that. And so I would come to set and I would freak out in front of a camera, ooh, and people would clap.
And it looked like things were not going to get better for him.
Hurt people was a big sinner in my life. And grew up believing that that was the way.
The things he further shared here revealed that he didn't just make terrible choices, but had the wrong influence in his life.
I came up looking at guys like Marlon Brando, Sean Penn. I didn't look up to like Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise.
And he said the next was nothing short of the truth.
The guys that interested me were the dark ones. I thought the dark ones were interesting. And I thought in order for me to be happy, I needed to make substantial work.
At this point, Shia sounded like a man who had not only seen it all, but also tasted it.
Everything, all these pictures you just showed are like Steven Spielberg movies or like Transformers movies, and it felt like none of them meant anything. They weren't about anything.
What he said in his landing was completely heartbreaking.
And the guys that were making movies that I thought were meaningful were brokenhearted.
The next question went further to create a graphical picture of Shia's experience.
Nothing gave you satisfaction in life?
Right, nothing. Yeah, no. So then I thought my life was pointless.
But that was not all he had to say.
Making money, getting famous, smoking weed, drinking, hurting people, lying to people, deceiving people.
And this is where it began to get really serious and interesting at the same time.
11 months ago, a woman put out an article in the New York Times saying I hurt her very bad.
You'd need to hear what he went on to say next.
All of the things that I used to use to fill my that emptiness up stopped working. And then I didn't want to be alive anymore.
It was not just interesting and serious, but on a completely different level.
And I had a producer. I had gotten arrested in Georgia for fighting with a policeman.
The producer was arrested?
No, I was arrested making a movie in Georgia for fighting with a policeman.
At the point where it seemed all the odds were against Shia, it was obvious God had a plan.
And on that movie was a producer who was in a spiritual program that helps people who have a problem with alcohol.
And it was obvious that for the first time in a long time, Shia found something worth living for.
And he told me to go on this meeting. So I go on this meeting and I see 50 men smiling and laughing. And that's my first sign of God, is laughter.
Not only that, it is clear to him that he has just found a family to call his own.
And so I listen, because I don't have any laughter in my life. And I see they're laughing with each other, and they have friendships, and they have camaraderie, and they have this fraternity.
Beyond a family, life started making a lot of sense to him again.
And I feel like, ooh, this is like a family. I had been making these movies all this time to build a family, making money to get a family, but my family was...
At this stage, it is undoubtedly clear that something inexplicably different was happening to Shia, though it was difficult to explain.
And I'm seeing a family, and I had tried to do this before, but this time I had none of the tools that used to bring me joy or fill that hole up worked anymore.
Based on Shia's explanation, his life was going through a fundamental change.
I would smoke weed and not get high. I would just be worse off than I was before. Or I would drink and I wouldn't get drunk. Or I would have sex with random women and I wouldn't feel any joy.
The most confusing aspect of Shia's experience was that he could not find a logical explanation for it.
There was none of the things I was doing to fill that human instinct were being fulfilled.
And this was one of the events that transformed his life.
And one of these men in the meeting, he says, we all share, everybody shares in the meeting. And one of the men in the meeting says,
but that was not all about the story Shia was telling.
you don't have everything you want, but you have everything you need right now.
Looking at the passion with which Shia spoke, it is clear his words were not empty.
He says, if you have God in your life, you're playing with loaded dice.
The words he heard from this man were undoubtedly priceless, as he took his time telling them, and this is where he landed.
God cheats in your favor.
To show how convinced Shia was about what had happened to him, he could not wait for the next question to respond.
So do you think it was the hand of God who helped you in that difficult moment?
Yes.
And he said there is absolutely no need for conviction or persuasion.
God destroyed my fake life, and at the time I was heartbroken. I thought, nah, this is like, I don't want to be here anymore. I was ready to leave.
But he did not stop there, he went on to say.
At first I fought it a lot. I thought, wait, I didn't do all these things this woman said about me, and I wanted to fight it, and I wanted to go on social media and say all this stuff, and I wanted to talk.
What he said next showed that he had found a new passion and interest.
To the world and say, oh, this didn't happen, here's the proof, and I wanted to argue. I realize now that this is partly why me and Pio's paths crossed.
What he added here sounded simple, but had a deep implication.
And I don't want to speak too much on that out of respect, but yes, God's hand was involved.
The question here is, does he mean what he just said about Father Pio?
In that woman going public with the damage that I caused her, yes. But to go back to the last question just for a second, because it leads to me meeting him and this whole thing happening.
It was obvious that Shia was a changed man, looking at his response to life and situations.
I'm going to this meeting a couple days, and finally my spiritual guidance, my friend, my partner online, says, come meet me at the beach.
This was the exact point where Shia and his true faith in God were tested.
And I have no God in my life, because my idea of God is just fear. And this man is talking from a fearless place, so I believe him.
But that was not the whole story.
And he points at the ocean, at the waves, and he says, I know you don't believe in God, that's okay. So why don't you just try to stop the waves?
Shia continued, as he was yet to hit his point.
I know you don't believe in God, that's okay, but your life is terrible. Your life sucks. The way you've been leading it is a disaster. Your life is a disaster. And I know he's right, and so I'm willing, because I'm in pain.
It seemed, based on his story, that everything happens for a reason, but that was not all.
And I say, stop waves, and the waves don't stop. And he says, no, put your back into it, really try. And I say, stop waves, and they don't stop.
Although nothing made sense, he had to believe. Maybe that's the only choice he had.
He says, I just want you to pray to the waves until God shows up. And so I do. And then a month later,
and this is where it all made sense.
I'm on my meeting, and Abel Ferreira asks me if I know about Padre Pio.